Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Robin's Movie Thoughts podcast. I'm your host, Robin Lalisse. Thank you for tuning in, and today I want to go over some movies I watched in August and September and give you my thoughts on them. I had never watched any Final Destination films prior to seeing the trailer for Final Destination Bloodlines, which looked like an interesting take on the franchise. Was hoping to see it in theaters, but never got around to both catching up on the series of films and then seeing it in the cinema. Before seeing Bloodlines when it got added to Max in August, I viewed the 5 prior installments. The first movie, released in 2000, was a good franchise starter with a creative concept that blended well with the comedic relief provided by characters played by Kerr Smith and Sean William Scott. The introduction of William Bloodworth, played by the iconic Tony Todd, a mortician who has incredible knowledge of death, but as an entity who has a design and order as to who dies and when. And then the lead performances are very good with Devon Sawa as Alex Browning and Ali Larter as Clear Rivers, respectively, and make the main characters who sense death's presence and try to save any survivors of their high school worth rooting for. Overall, a solid first movie, and I give it a 7 out of 10. The second film is a downgrade, as though Larter returns as Clear Rivers, and there are great moments such as the log truck scene. Much of it feels like a direct-to-DVD sequel. The characters and dialogue aren't as strong, and the kills rely more on gore to shock than any sort of creativity. Overall, I'm between a 4 and a 5 out of 10 on Final Destination 2. Final Destination 3 is a return to form, with Mary Elizabeth Winstead being incredible screen queen as Wendy Christensen, whose premonition of death on a roller coaster makes her leave before others, including her boyfriend, tragically pass. The imagery and cinematography are really upgraded from previous installments, with the transition from 2 burning tanning beds to 2 coffins, probably the best example. The ending is great as well, as Wendy has another premonition of a train derailment resulting in everyone's death, with Tony Todd's one appearance being in the voice role of the conductor. And despite her best efforts, she is unable to stop the inevitable. The third installment gets a 7 out of 10 from me. Then comes the biggest fall-off in the franchise in the series for me, the Final Destination, which had a $40 million budget, far bigger when compared to $25 million for Final Destination 3, and it somehow looks far worse. It relies heavily on ultra-gory scenes, even when compared to previous installments, and on CG, and not very good CGI, for those scenes, especially during the opening NASCAR chase scene. There's also a very off-putting opening and ending credits sequence that just feels way too much like a music video / recap of the other better movies. The lead character is very bland and probably the weakest of any film in the franchise. Overall, just a complete misfire, and I give it a 2 out of 10. Final Destination 5 is a good bounce back, as while it isn't as well done as 1 and 3, it has a more self-referential and deprecating tone that keeps it light and fun. It also introduces the hilarious concept of getting someone's remaining lifespan if they die instead of you, and there's a tremendous ending with a twist that connects to the first film. 14 years after the release of the 5th installment came Final Destination Bloodlines in May. The story revolves around Stephanie Reyes, played by Caitlin Santawana, a college student who has a recurring nightmare involving a tragic event that resulted in the deaths of hundreds during the opening of a high-rise restaurant tower. This has caused her massive issues in trying to continue her studies and live her life with increased stress and sleepless nights. She finds out the events are from the memories of her maternal grandmother, Iris, played by Gabrielle Rose, who tells Stephanie that the nightmare was the premonition she had before stopping the events and deaths of all the attendees of the tower opening. However, her efforts eventually became meaningless, as any and all who attended later died in violent accidents, as well as their offspring. Stephanie and her family initially don't believe this is the case, but when accidental deaths start happening to their family tree, they start to believe in this curse and try everything in their power to stop it. As I said before, the trailers for this movie intrigued me with the idea that death's design, in this case, not only extended to the survivors of a near mass casualty event, but also to any family created afterward. They take this plotline to a ridiculous extreme, but in a good way, with very creative kills and a ton of dark humor. Santawana is great as the lead and final girl, and is complemented well by Ted Briones, who plays her brother Charlie, and Richard Harmon, who plays her cousin Eric, who works at a tattoo parlor. Harmon is phenomenal as the comedic relief, but I would be remiss without mentioning Tony Todd in his final performance as William Bloodworth, released posthumously as he passed away in November 2024. His appearance is brief, but an excellent capper to his iconic career in one of the best scenes of the film. There's a lot of dumb in this movie that's forgivable with this type of premise, although how Iris builds a near impenetrable fortress in an off-the-beaten-path locale is one that make a whole lot of sense, but regardless, this was a fun horror movie, and I give it a 7 out of 10. My familiarity with the Naked Gun series, previous to hearing there would be a reboot released in August, was limited. I had viewed clip compilations of best moments from the franchise, but had never watched any of the movies or any of Police Squad, which I still haven't either. In watching the original trilogy, it's patently obvious how impeccable Leslie Nielsen's comedic timing and deadpan humor is as Lieutenant Frank Drebin. The first movie is the favorite of his, as the freshest and most consistently funny throughout, with plenty of great lines and visual gags without going overboard. The chemistry Nielsen has with Priscilla Presley as his love interest, Jane Spencer, along with George Kennedy as his partner, Captain Ed Hawken, help make almost all scenes. Ricardo Montalban is my favorite villain in these movies. Third act is a tad weak compared to the first two acts for me, as I feel like the baseball umpire scene goes on for far too long and takes some of the momentum, but still very good comedy movie in my book, and I give it a 7 out of 10. The sequel, Naked Gun 2.5, The Smell of Fear, is a bit more haphazard and convoluted, as it tries to include plot lines such as President George H.W. Bush and the country's energy policy, and Frank seeing Jane for the first time since the two separated off screen. The jokes don't feel as new, and any sort of parodies and makes aren't as effective. A decent downgrade to the previous, and I give it a 5 out of 10. The third movie, The Naked Gun 33 1/3, The Final Insult, is a little bit of more of a return to form, even if it's not quite on the level of the first film. There are a ton of hilarious hijinks between Frank and Jane being back together and trying to raise a family, with Drebin's retirement and Frank having to go undercover as a jail prisoner in order to get intel on bomber Rocco Dillon, played by Fred Ward. A slight upgrade, and I will give it a 6 out of 10. And this brings us to the 2025 reboot, with Liam Neeson taking on the role of Frank Drebin Jr., trying to cement his own legacy in law enforcement while honoring his father, similar to Captain Ed Hawken Jr., played by Paul Walter Hauser. After stopping a bank robbery but creating a bunch of damage and mayhem throughout his time, he is reassigned to Collision Squad by Chief Davis, played by C.C.H. Pounder. His first assignment involves investigating what appears to be a suicide from a fatal car crash, but the victim's sister, Beth Davenport, played by Pamela Anderson, is a crime novelist who believes there was some foul play. Drebin and Davenport develop a romantic relationship while also examining what a wealthy tech developer by the name of Richard Kane, played by Danny Houston, had to do with Simon Davenport's death. When initially announced with Neeson as the lead, I was very skeptical. As great a performer as he's been in his career, that he could come close to the comedic genius of Leslie Nielsen was a bit much, but Liam Neeson was actually pretty fantastic in the role. The way he and his co-stars play off each other in scenes is very reminiscent of the originals, though it's combined with more of a Mission Impossible-esque tone to the action and editing style. Composer Lauren Balfe, who did the score for Mission Impossible 6 and 7, uses similar beats from that music to evoke that tone, though there is almost a shot-for-shot remade scene from MI6 in a scene that was somewhat comedic but overdone. Anderson is very funny and continues a career renaissance, coming off her acclaimed performance in The Last Showgirl. Pounder channels her The Shield days in her scenes with a humorous backdrop, and Hauser and Houston are fun scene partners with Neeson. I would put this on par with the first Naked Gun movie, as it is laugh-out-loud funny at parts, with tons of great jokes and visual gags, but a couple of lulls with subplots and scenes that drag at points that keep from being all-time comedy level. Still, I would give it a 7 out of 10. Weapons is director Zach Cregger's follow-up to 2022's Barbarian, a surprising box office and streaming horror hit that made Cregger's screenplay for this film among the most sought out in the industry. Warner Brothers won the bid over Jordan Peele's production company and allowed Kreger to realize his vision on a bigger budget, a $38 million budget compared to Barbarian's $4 million, and scale. The story revolves around the mysterious disappearance of 17 third-grade kids from a class taught by Justine Handy, played by Julie Garner, in the town of Maybrook, Pennsylvania. Handy is ostracized by the community as parents believe that she had something to do with the kids leaving their homes at 2:17 a.m., seemingly all synchronized. A father of one of the missing children, named Archer Graff, played by Josh Brolin, is traumatized and unable to live his life without any answers. He continues to investigate the events of that night in depth, as does Justine, against the wishes of Principal Marcus Miller, played by Benedict Wong, who wants her far away from the school to avoid community suspicion and distrust of the education system. Through a mix of the Rashomon effect of events from several characters' differing perspectives and a story structure similar to 1999's Magnolia, the plot shifts viewpoints from their eyes to others, those of police officer Paul Morgan, played by Alden Ehrenreich, and a homeless drug addict and burglar named James, played by Austin Abrams, who both inadvertently get inserted into the violent events surrounding the inquiry into where the children went. Weapons was a more ambitious and methodically placed horror film by Kreger in comparison to Barbarian that also blended great dark comedy and had some incredible filmmaking on display. A lot of continuous tracking shots that set up the environments and pathways throughout the town for characters to go through, and they were tremendously effective and brought the intensity up during the most action-packed scenes, including with car and people chases. The camera angle on the door opening of the car chases was one I loved. There were also some great reveals that I won't spoil. The portions I enjoyed the most are when the movie centered around Archer and Justine having to navigate their lives while also greatly affected by the events and wanting clarity, no matter the lengths they need to go to, greatly accented by the performances from Brolin and Garner. While the film does take its time, it eventually becomes very much worth it, providing a unique take on how fear and judgment can become weaponized in every neighborhood, as can people's beliefs as to how to best protect kids in today's culture. It's also one that has grown on me since first seeing it, and one that I ended up giving so far an 8 out of 10. The Long Walk is a dystopian survival film based on a book by Stephen King, directed by Francis Lawrence, with a screenplay by J.T. Molnar. In the United States under military rule, 50 boys, one selected randomly from each state, compete in an annual event in which they walk continuously with little to no breaks at a speed of at least 3 miles per hour, or they are killed. The selection from the home state of the event, Maine, contestant number 47, Raymond Garrity, played by Cooper Hoffman, is dropped off by his mom, played by Judy Greer, and meets the other participants. They include number 23, Peter McGreeves, played by David Johnson, number 38, Billy Stebbins, played by Garrett Waring, number 6, Arthur Art Blake, played by Tut Nuyut, number 45, Gary Barkovich, played by Charlie Plummer, and number 46, Hank Olson, played by Ben Wang. They are both praised for their bravery, but told the brutal fate that will rise if they don't last till the very end by a loud and boisterous major, played by Mark Hamill. From the very beginning, this movie lets you know it will be about male friendship and camaraderie, but will hit you with the emotional sledgehammer that most of these characters will not make it through in excruciating fashion. Garrity is a great lead character performed perfectly by Hoffman, as he is doing his best to survive as kindly as possible, but for reasons of vengeance toward the regime. Whoever wins the race is given the ability to wish for whatever they want. As we learn more about his past in relationship to the world before it was controlled by the military, Ray strikes up a strong connection to Peter, who wants to use his wish to make the world a better place. Johnson is incredible in his role as well, as he is able to convey high levels of charisma and likability in deep conversations with Hoffman while walking in stride. Over the several-day journey, the physical and mental toll on the contestants escalates any and all frustrations and relationships, and Lawrence's direction really excels at balancing these tones and events. Hamill is used sparingly but effectively, chewing scenery with drill sergeant mannerisms, and a commanding screen presence. Of the two Stephen King adaptations that starred Hamill this year, this and The Life of Chuck, I slightly preferred this one due to how well the story flowed and the strength of the actors throughout, with Hoffman and Johnson looking like potential stars about to hit the stratosphere. I will give The Long Walk an 8 out of 10. One Battle After Another is an action thriller movie directed by Paul Thomas Anderson and starring Leonardo DiCaprio as a member of the French 75, a far-left revolutionary group that commits their brand of vigilante justice, such as freeing immigrants, robbing banks, etc. He falls in love with fellow revolutionary Perfidia Beverly Hills, played by Tiana Taylor, and fathers a child with her. However, when Perfidia is captured by authorities, including Colonel Stephen J. Lockjaw, played by Sean Penn, DiCaprio's character changes his name to Bob Ferguson to escape law enforcement and raise his daughter Willow. When she turns 16 and is then portrayed by Chase Infinity and is living in Sanctuary City, Backton Cross, her karate training given by Sensei Sergio San Carlos, played by Benicio del Toro, and tutoring regarding secrecy and espionage by Bob are put to the test. The remaining French 75 members, still unpopulous, are being hunted down by Lockjaw and the government, and Bob, Willow, Sergio, and Deandra, played by Regina Hall, must run and fight like hell to avoid imprisonment. The film is loosely inspired by the 1990 novel Vineland, written by Thomas Pynchon about the government's war on drugs, that was filmed in very early 2024 and appears to be set in today's times. Paul Thomas Anderson has always been one of the most unique directors out there, and none of his films feel like carbon copies or slight variations on his previous work, with classics like Magnolia, Punch Drunk Love, There Will Be Blood, and Phantom Thread already under his belt. PTA has built up a lot of goodwill with his audience, but also has a lot to live up to with any new film of his. This is his first with a massive budget, reported anywhere from $130 million to $175 million, and to be so action-heavy with a pair of top-tier car chase scenes, one in the city and one in a valley, both shot in very unique and beautiful ways. For a film that's nearly 3 hours long, there's very little filler, and everything flows so well, and it turns out to be an entertaining romp despite it being about dark subject matter and being a very timely story. The casting and acting is top tier across the board, as the relationship between Bob and Perfidia is portrayed pitch perfectly by DiCaprio and Taylor. It is showcased as a passionate romance, but one in which both are dealing with identity crises, Bob wanting to concentrate on being a father and building a family, and Perfidia not quite ready or committed to motherhood and still wanting to exact change in the world. It is quite high praise to say any performance of DiCaprio is career best work, but that talk is very much warranted here. The statements of his character being very similar to the dude in Big Lebowski, mostly based on his attire, kind of minimize the arc Bob goes through, and DiCaprio has a couple trademark hilarious and unhinged phone conversations he's known for, to go along with showing vulnerability as both a father and revolutionary who isn't quite able to live up at times to his family members, despite his very best efforts. Penn plays the quintessential evil military general, and he is incredibly stoic, but shielding a dark edge and intensity that comes out in fury. His deadpan expression throughout plays well in both dramatic and comedic scenes, especially those in a very funny subplot. Del Toro is able to exude aura and calmness as the sensei, and has some of the funnier quips and scenes in his limited screen time. Chase Infinity has a star-making turn as the teenage version of Willow, as she is able to convey a ton in scenes with only eyes and next to no dialogue, and is able to be demanding of Bob as both her dad and revolutionary, in which Infinity more than holds her own in those scenes. This is another collaboration between PTA and composer Johnny Greenwood, and they work incredibly well as a pairing. There are a ton of great piano tracks and one-note uses, with my favorites being One Battle After Another and Backton Cross. I enjoyed this movie thoroughly on first viewing and look to do so in future viewings, and as of now, I'd give it a 9 out of 10. Thanks again for tuning in to the Robin's Movie Thoughts podcast. You can find me on Letterboxd, Robin Lalisse, and on X at Rob the Movie Buff. Would very much appreciate any likes or subscriptions to the channel, and any comments of what you think of any movies and TV shows, including the ones reviewed here and outside. Thanks again, and love y'all.